We're about 24 hours away from kickoff, Mike, of the Cotton Bowl, OU versus Clemson. I said the Cotton Bowl, the Orange Bowl in Miami, of course. OU versus Clemson, one of the national semifinal games. I'm Dave Morris, joined by sports editor of the Oklahoman, Mike Sherman, here in the Oklahoman's video studios in downtown Oklahoma City, the corner of Sheridan and Robinson. And we are joined by Barry Tramel, who is in Fort Lauderdale. And we'll get into his travel plans and the fantastic hotel that he's at shortly. Barry, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, gentlemen. I guess I got better weather than we have back home.
Mike, he's going to rub that in. Before we were setting up the camera shot, there's guys in shorts and polo shirts wandering around. There's palm trees waving in the background behind Barry. We have 35 degrees here.
35 degrees, Dave, but isn't it about 10 degrees or 15 degrees warmer than it was yesterday?
Yes.
And by the way, you couldn't tell by Barry. He dresses the same no matter what. That's the way he'd be dressed if he was here. He doesn't look like he doesn't have any kind of beach wear on. He's down there working, so he is not enjoying the sunshine maybe as much as most folks are.
Barry's joining us, as we mentioned, from Fort Lauderdale, just outside his hotel, the Renaissance Cruise Port in Fort Lauderdale. And Barry, how is the hotel there?
It's an okay hotel. It's conveniently located for everybody getting on the cruise ships. Now, in 08, we were down by the beach, about a mile away from here, so you could step outside the hotel and get yourself to a beach. But here, this is a hotel that basically serves the people about to get on a cruise. You can walk to the cruise ships from here, a couple of blocks away, so that's sort of its purpose. I'm not getting on a cruise ship, so that doesn't do me any good. But been too busy to do anything anyway. Back in 08, I made it down to the beach the morning of the ball game. So where the hotel is sort of irrelevant. Just too much work to get ready for the Oklahoma-Clemson game.
Barry's been in Florida since the weekend. You can follow his blog on newsok.com. Click on blog, scroll down to Barry Tramel. It's an interesting read. He does a great job of blogging during the travel. Barry, you mentioned the police escort that you had from the hotel to the press conferences earlier this week. And it's not good when the escort leaves behind the convoy, right?
Yeah, we got an escort over to the Sun Life Stadium. It's about a 20-minute drive from here, or 25-minute without traffic. But Broward County sent about 4 or 5 sheriff cruisers over to accompany us, and they did a great job of getting out ahead and blocking off traffic. But they sort of left us, so people just filled in behind the cops, and we sort of had to avoid them. So. I think police escorts work better when one gets right in front of the convoy and one gets right behind the convoy, and that lets everybody know exactly why the police have their sirens on and their lights flashing.
Mike, we heard Bob Stoops this morning. The coaches gave another press conference. They had press conferences yesterday as well with the players, and we'll get into the Joe Mixon and the various player press conferences. This morning, though, we heard from OU coach Bob Stoops. He followed Dabo Swinney, and, of course, they had the mugging in front of the Orange Bowl trophy. What did we hear this morning from the coach?
Well, Dave and Barry, I was most interested in what Stoops had to say about the delay, the famous delay before the Kansas State game, 10 hours. I've read stories about it, but the more I hear about it, the more Spartan it seems, the more crazy it seems that they spent 10 hours cooped up in a place, in a holding room before you get on an airplane. They thought about trying to go back to Norman, but Bob explained the thoughts about the strategy behind not doing that, trying to gather everybody up again. He talked about the way they divided up, meetings over here, offensive, defensive, and the guys that didn't have any meetings, they just went and listened to music. He gave Kentucky Fried Chicken a huge plug.
He gave a lot of plugs to some KFC, didn't he?
And of course, this has become just one of those stories, fireside stories that the Sooners like telling because of what they rebounded from. So that was interesting to me. Barry asked him if he would consider taking a bus the next time to Kansas State. Barry, I was interested in his response to that. That sounds like your travel plans. That's a thing I can rely on you doing to get our staff around and maybe save some money. Bob didn't have any interest in taking a bus to Manhattan, though, did he?
No, he wasn't too interested, although, until recently they would bus down to Waco. You got to drive through Dallas or Fort Worth to get to Waco, so I don't know why you wouldn't bus to Manhattan. But no, he still likes the flight. So, it's probably, he said this is only the second bad travel experience in 17 years. Once to Lubbock, they had their flight canceled on the way home, had to take buses home. So that's not a bad ratio. Once every eight or 9 years, you could probably go ahead and fly for a while and be okay. But I think that experience there in that charter airplane terminal, sort of Spartan environment, I think it did have a good effect on the Sooners. I had a booster tell me he was on that trip, and he said it was fabulous because it did cause people just to sit around and interact with each other. He said he got to talk with Samaje Perine. Perine told him that day that Perine had talked to teammates that night he had never talked to before. So sometimes unfortunate situations do draw us together.
And if there was one person Coach Stoops could ask among the media there as how long that drive is, Barry Tramel's the person who would know immediately how long that drive was and probably places to stop in between.
And Barry asked the question. And his follow-up to it, Barry, I can't remember what it was, but he also got an interesting response to that. What was your follow-up question?
Well, I asked a lot of the guys yesterday, particularly Joe Mixon, talked about in the aftermath of the Texas loss, how did Oklahoma rebound from that? And Mixon mentioned the responses of Stoops and Lincoln Riley in the locker room at the Cotton Bowl, and then sort of an inspirational, fiery speech from Zach Sanchez, and how Zach Sanchez sort of tried to hold the team accountable. And I asked Bob Stoops about Sanchez's speech, and Stoops had some really interesting things to say. Basically, sometimes we overrate a coach's ability to motivate players. Players have to want to be motivated, and if they don't really want to be motivated, they can't be. And I think that seemed to be the thrust of Zach Sanchez's message to his teammates that, hey, guys, we got to want this. We got to come out every week ready to play. We got to come out hungry. We got to come out focused. Apparently, Zach Sanchez lit into him pretty good, and at least according to several Sooners, they really responded to Zach Sanchez.
We're looking at a little file footage there of Zach Sanchez, and Barry in his blog. His latest entry talks about that Cotton Bowl speech and how that was a turning point for OU. Joe Mixon was also mentioned in our little segment here. Mike, yesterday Joe was available to the media for the first time all season, for the first time since the incident back in 2014. Your thoughts on how that went?
Well, it really makes no sense to do it like they did. And the people who were involved in this decision, Dave, they make a lot of sense. I mean, Joe Castiglione's a smart guy. David Bourne is a United States Senator. Bob Stoops has an a Big Ten education. Not Ivy, sorry, Bob. So these are smart people. And so why would they put Joe Mixon, for the first time he ever speaks, why would it be in this setting? And my thoughts about it is they had no other choices. There are legal issues behind the scenes to which they couldn't just have Joe talking. And now they're forced to do it by the rules that the college football playoff and the bowls have set up and agreed to.
And the rules are every coach, every player must be available, or you pay a fine. They must have decided we're not going to pay that fine.
Well, they didn't want to pay the fine, and they didn't want to pay a fine in the court of public opinion because it looks like they're really trying to do stuff. So I think OU tried to manage it as best it could. I think the reporters were doing their jobs. I do know that I think there seemed to be one reporter who was who started off just asking the tough questions about the incident. And that doesn't really warm up an interviewee, and it doesn't warm up the room. That made things a little more difficult. Just all in all, a bad situation that you wish could be avoidable, but maybe there was no avoiding it.
What did you learn from his interview?
Not much.
Finally getting a chance to hear from him.
It was a terrible situation. It was poorly handled from the start by Oklahoma. I mean, Joe Mixon should have been trotted out months and months, 18 months ago. And they had a series of bad decisions. David Bourne is usually so good at public relations. He was not on this. Now, yes, and a lawyer got involved, legal issues got involved, but Oklahoma had the power in this regard. The Sooners held the playing status of Joe Mixon in their hands. They should have mapped out a plan that said, this is the way we're going to do it. You're going to go out in front of the public. You're going to apologize for what happened. You're going to say you're going to rectify this mistake. You're going to prove to people that this is not who you are, and then we're going to put this behind us. And here 18 months later, that still hasn't happened. So the events of yesterday were just a natural result of the poor decision making. So, OU might have been better off yesterday just paying the fine, keeping Joe Mixon back at the hotel, paying the fine, because I think it just it gave OU another black eye.
Barry, you wrote in your travel blog, each of these players had about an hour with the media, and after about 45 minutes or so, the media died down around Joe Mixon. You had some one-on-one time with him. What did you learn? How was he? Who is Joe Mixon?
Well, I didn't learn much. I mean, I don't know who guys I've talked to. I don't know who Sam Bradford and Landry Jones are. I've talked to them 100 times. But, I will say this. Joe Mixon did not come across well yesterday. He came across a little bit of an attitude, a little bit of an arrogance. Didn't sound like he'd gotten, to me, in my mind, he didn't get the media training that he needed. So even though he had determined, and his lawyers apparently had determined, that he wasn't going to talk about certain issues, the way he presented himself did him no favors at all. So I think in the future, that's something Oklahoma is going to have to address, because, it's one thing if you're not allowed to say anything, but how you communicate without words is important too. And Joe Mixon just came across as a guy that didn't understand what all the fuss was about, didn't understand why everybody cared about what happened at Pickleman's Cafe, and that didn't do him or the university any good at all.
We should also mention Jason Kersey, one of the OU beat writers, is with Barry in Fort Lauderdale. Not feeling the best today. We hope he feels better soon. But last night on Twitter, him, Garen Emeg, and some other reporters were taking some heat from Sooner fans who were asking why this line of questioning about Joe Mixon. But you have to ask these questions.
You do, Dave. And one of the things about this story is that we have, or not I, but Jason, Ryan Aber, Barry Tramel, Jenny Carlson, other media members in this market, they've seen the video from Pickleman's Cafe. They were in a group of people that were brought in and given a private showing of it. They weren't allowed to have recording devices. They were allowed to take notes. They saw it. Our folks wrote about it. You can look at those recollections and impressions on News OK right now. Barry Tramel, was quoted in the New York Times today.
I was about to say New York Times had a story, I saw it online yesterday, and they quoted Barry, and Barry's thought was, well, what did you expect to see in that? You knew, you had already heard what had gone down in that video.
But seeing is believing, and if you think about how the folks who have not seen it, well, and they've heard about it, in some cases hearsay. There's talk that, about she struck him first. Yeah, but what was that strike like? And Barry has a different view of it from Jason, mostly because he says, hey, what did you expect was going to happen? But there's no denying the brutal punch that he gave a young woman. So the people have seen that. The general public, they've never seen it, and so their recollections of it have gone down. People want to move on. Remember, there were people who saw the Ray Rice video and wore Ray Rice jerseys to Baltimore Ravens games after it. So people want to look at football players as, in some cases, special human beings that shouldn't have to deal with things like you and I and the rest of us do. And so let's just let them play football. And so those are some of the folks that are asking the questions. Those are also some of the folks who want to say to us, why are you bringing it up now? Never minding the idea and not understanding the idea that there was no before. This was the first time any of us have ever spoken to Joe Mixon. So we have a disconnect between the people who cover the team, who've covered this issue, and the people who are the consumers. Maybe we need to do a little bit better job every time of explaining the why.
Could be. Let's move on a little bit more to some game situation. And Mike, let me pick up this paper right here. This week, doing some really cool things in the Oklahoman. I'll hold it up for this camera right here. This is a commemorative reprint, if you will, of the 6th national title that OU won. This is January 2nd, 1986. If you go to your newsstands, Metro retail locations, if you haven't picked one up from your driveway, you can find the 1985 National Championship collector poster. This is number 6 of 7 we're doing this week. Tomorrow, of course, will be Bob Stoops' championship. And that segues us into the story that you had on the front page of Sports Today, Barry, of how Baker Mayfield and Russell Westbrook share a motivational trait. What do you mean by that, Barry?
Well, I mean, I think we all can see with a lot of examples how Russell Westbrook sort of invents enemies. I'm not exactly Exhibit A, but I might be Exhibit C or D. So, Russell wants a chip on his shoulder. He wants to play with an edge. He wants to be angry. And so he finds reasons to get himself worked up, whatever fuels his fire. Now, Baker Mayfield doesn't play with the same kind of venom that Russell Westbrook plays with. A lot more joy in Baker Mayfield's game. But Mayfield does invent enemies. He goes out of his way to feel slights so that so they can fuel him. Down here in Miami, he's taking on Gary Patterson. I mean, when we got down here, we would have said Gary Patterson's near the top of his list. He's the one big-time coach coming out of high school who gave Baker Mayfield the time of day. And yet Baker Mayfield says, Gary Patterson doesn't like me. So I think that's just some made-up venom, some made-up slights that Baker Mayfield uses to fuel himself, and that's much like Russell Westbrook.
It is interesting, Mike, right? Gary Patterson is like, whoa, where'd this come from?
He's standing down there getting ready for the Alamo Bowl, I think it is, Barry, saying, I'm just standing here. And he gets sideswiped by Baker Mayfield. And, of course, once he realized he'd been hit, Gary Patterson took the gloves off. And so now it's not a perceived slight between him.
He came out swinging.
He came out swinging. So now he invented something and it exists. There is now officially a rift between Gary Patterson and the Mayfields. Yeah. And he took into James Mayfield, too.
All right,
yeah,
Mike.
I mean, he took a shot at James Mayfield. And so you're right. They don't like each other now. I don't know how they really felt about each other 2 days ago, but they really do not dislike each other now.
Barry, at the press conference this morning, Dabo Swinney was asked, of course, about the 3 players and their disciplinary action. They will not be playing tomorrow night. He basically dismissed this, saying, hey, that wasn't our top wide receiver. Your thoughts on the coach's reaction and the, the effect of those 3 players not playing for Clemson?
Well, I mean, I don't know. There's no way really to quantify it. I don't know if Swinney actually believes that it won't have an effect. There's no great reason to think that it will. Deion Crane's a very good receiver. He's got 34 catches this year, a deep threat, got 580 yards receiving. That'll be difficult to replace. I mean, it's sort of like if Oklahoma lost Deron Neal. The Sooners aren't overrun with great receivers, so if you lose one that you like, that hurts you. To me, the one place to look is the kicker who was kicked off the team. He's not the field goal kicker anymore, but he is their kickoff specialist. OU has not been good on kickoff returns this year, but they still got a home run hitter back there in Alex Ross. So if the Clemson kickoffs all of a sudden become a little shorter than usual, that brings Alex Ross back into play. That's something to look at in the Orange Bowl.
That's a great point, Barry. When I was listening to Mayfield talk and thinking of the Mixon story, I started thinking about some of these big off-the-field bowl issues that OU had in the past. You go to Miami, you get Switzer campaigning against BYU, then they get beat by Washington, and the Sooner Schooner intervenes. You get the Bosworth year.
I was about to say the Bosworth thing was huge.
The Bosworth year. Of course, they won that game. But Bosworth, and you're making the Bosworth-Mayfield analogy there, and you're wondering, gosh, the Sooners seem to be making more news off the field in this thing, and that, generally speaking, is not a good thing. And then comes the Clemson news. As Barry said, very astutely, the OU return game hadn't been anything. It's just been blah. And all of a sudden, now there's a question. Can this guy not get the ball in the end zone. If he can't, Alex Ross can take it back. I know it's not their best receiver, but listen, Dabo Swinney, his pride and joy at Clemson is their receiving core. He doesn't have any bad receivers on it. He was the receivers coach. They sent him to the NFL. Martavius Bennett, the guy in Buffalo. I mean, Clemson wide receivers that's an elite position. So any loss there is not good. So as you're saying, who has the advantage in the pregame? I was worried about the Sooners and all the talk. I'd be more worried about Clemson and the losses of personnel. You can't sustain losses in personnel in an elite game and say we're the same team.
We'll wrap it up there. The game, of course, is Thursday, New Year's Eve, 3 p.m. You can watch it on ESPN. You can also follow News OK's live tweets on the various reporters covering it there and from here on Twitter. Big thanks to Barry Tramel joining us today from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Big thanks to Mike Sherman, sports editor of the Oklahoman, for your participation and analysis today. I need to say thanks to Greg Singleton and Grayson Cook back in the booth for helping us out, and Tim Money behind the camera there in Florida. We'll do this again tomorrow at 1 p.m. Oklahoma time for another live debrief from here and from Miami to see what's new in the 24 hours that's happened between now and then, leading up to the Orange Bowl, again, 3 p.m. Thursday between OU and Clemson. Guys, I enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dave.